Bueno. Bueno. Hello everyone. Hola a todos. Si nos hacen el favor de sentarse porque vamos un poquito tarde. Un anuncio. Languages, and then we thought that would be interesting, as this is a Latin American session, that we would speak actually in Spanish. Okay, so if you need translation, but Toni is also going, he's from Brazil, so he said he's going to speak in English. So I think everybody needs, if you don't speak Spanish or English, you need headphones, you need translation. So we will give you just 1 minute for that, so that everybody can have headphones. Y ahora ya voy a empezar a hablar español, que claro.
And now I'm going to speak Spanish. It's a little easier for me, of course. Welcome. It is a pleasure to have you all here at this session. It has to do with advancing integrated transport in Latin American cities. And we've worked on this for many, many years, so we have a lot of history behind us. And we always talk about the story of Bogota and Curitiba. And what we see in Latin America as time goes by is that we've won important battles, and there are many public transportation systems that are operational, that are becoming stronger, and we are moving forward, perhaps at a pace that is not the most fast, and we have traffic problems, and also we have accidents. We see rates that are not as favorable as we feel they should be. So I think we should look at the challenges that cities impose and the challenges that cities impose in connection with the implementation of their mass transit systems. So when are we going to have public transportation as a solution that it is indeed considered an option? In Latin America, even though one may be able to buy a car, one may say, no, it is more convenient for me, it is more interesting for me to take public transportation. Now, the work that we're doing heads in that direction. Our panel is really extraordinary. We have Mr. Augusto Barrera. He's the mayor of Quito. We have Maria del Pilar Rodriguez. She is the president of Metrocali from the city of Cali, Colombia. She's also the vice president of the Latin American Association of Integrated BRT Systems. We have Arturo Ardila-Gomez. He is a senior urban transport specialist at the World Bank. We have Jorge Kogan. He is the senior transportation advisor of the CAF. We have Mr. Rafael Acevedo Daunas. He's a transportation specialist of the IDB. Luis Antonio Lidal, who is the president of EMBARQ Brazil, and Bernardo Baranda. He is the regional director of the ITDP in Latin America. Welcome to all of the panel members. It's going to be a pleasure to share this session with you and this debate with you. Mr. Barrera is going to give a presentation, then Maria del Pilar Rodriguez is going to give her presentation. We're going to hold a discussion right after, and we are going to involve the audience as well with questions and comments. Augusto, welcome. You're the mayor of Quito. Welcome. You have the floor. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation extended to me. I'm going to try and make the most of the few minutes that we have. One of the main challenges that Quito has is to structure an integrated public transportation system, a mass transit system to transport people. I would like to talk about the state we're in and the challenges we have and the steps that we are going to take moving forward. And I think if we can put the presentation on the screen. Quito has 2.3 million inhabitants. It has is integrated with 2 other urban areas. About 3 million people use the services in the city. About 3 million people use those services, I was saying. And it is a very complex city. It's a very diverse city. The urban consolidated area is about 50 kilometers long. It's about 53 kilometers long. But it's also a city that's 3 kilometers wide, so it's basically a rectangle. It is also like it looks like a tie a little bit. It's at the bottom it's wider, and at the top it's a little bit thinner. And the city is growing at a 2% rate. Population-wise, and we have a growth of the vehicle fleet that is 4 times that rate, and we see that the vehicles are 4 times growing 4 times more than the population. Also, the city is very close to the sea, so contamination and pollution is an issue. Next. So, last year, we conducted a mobility study that was quite comprehensive, and this included Line 1 of our metro system. We used more than 80,000 commuter trips as a basis, and it has given us an image of the city. It's one of the most comprehensive studies that I've seen, because these origin and destination surveys look at the different parts of the city, and we were able to identify the origin and destination trips in a very precise manner. And this is a summary. Here in red you see what we call mass transportation. Blue is private transportation, and in green you see bicycles and walking, etc. So we take into account walking and bicycles as well. We have a very good bicycle sharing program that has been extraordinarily successful. And these are the results. As you saw yesterday, about 73–74% of the people use public transportation or mass transportation. And we include there school transportation, institutional transportation, and about 25% of the population use private transportation means. And we see in the different figures here. We have a very structured system, but the conventional bus system, it's not a BRT system. We still have buses as the most important means of transportation in our city. Conventional buses, not BRT buses, but conventional buses are key to the mobility of our people. Now we see here how people are traveling, and this may be quite specific for you, but many people cross the city. They go across the city, and the trips that are going from north to south are basic, if you will, and here you see the other trips. And then we have the main aspects that have to do with the reasons why people make trips, basically because of their employment, the place they work. And as any other city that becomes more modern, culturally speaking also, we see an increase in trips and also an increase in people, and people are moving more and more as well. So people are becoming freer and to move. People in my generation, you played soccer on the street, your girlfriend was in your neighborhood, but now things are very different. People of younger generations, they travel to their clubs to play sport, they go away from the neighborhood, etc. So this has to do with population growth, and also this means that there are more people moving elsewhere. Now we have about 1.8 trips per person, and I'm sure that that number is going to increase as people become freer to move around the city. So there are certain concerns in connection with this. If we are trying to set a trend, Although public transportation is a very important component, in the past few years we've seen levels of motorization that have been really incredible. The city has 420,000 vehicles, and we have about 40,000 vehicles that are coming into the city yearly. So in 10 years' time, we're going to have double the vehicles, and we're not going to have double the roads. So we're going to have to change the public transportation system, and we are making enormous efforts to try to revert that trend and to change that trend. We're going to try and make people opt for the public transportation system instead of private transportation systems. So we've seen a financial crisis in our country in 1999, and savings were depleted, really, and so people say, okay, it's better for me to buy a car, to have a car. It's a tangible thing than having a bank account. So people would like to make investments in an asset rather than have their money in the bank. In 1999, we had a financial crisis that depleted all of the savings, etc. So people have those ideas, and also there's a certain social status that the car brings with it, and there are more vehicles being bought by people going up to the higher classes. So it is necessary for us to strengthen public transportation systems. We have to work on trips, especially non-motorized trips, and to have a rational use of vehicles as well. Now, we have a long-term structural solution that we have set, and that's a very, very important challenge that we have ahead of us. And that is why we have changed the regulations, and we have passed laws. And one of these laws is the integrated transportation system. And this transportation system has three subsystems. First, we have the metropolitan system, the metro bus system. The metro bus system is the corridor system and the BRT system, and the conventional bus system, which is the regular bus. And all of these means of transportation are going to be brought together in one single system. And this has brought about certain important changes from the institutional viewpoint. And we have three large components that have been very nicely structured. And we have a single transportation authority in our city. We have a very clear structure for planning, and this has to do with monitoring and policies. And this authority is the mayor's office and the Secretariat of Mobility. And then we have other regulatory entities. We have an agency for transit control. In 2013, we are going to have all the powers to control the transit in the city. We are going to have all those powers in our hands in 2013. And then in red here, you see the operational capacity that we have. We have a public passenger company, we have a metro company, and a mobility company. The first one has to do with infrastructure, the second moving passengers, and the third has to do with the metro system. And this works in a very global manner, in a very globalized manner, or general manner rather. And this is what the city has. We have main corridor systems, and everybody looks at Curitiba, but we established BRT systems in Quito a little bit before Curitiba did. So we had the first BRT system established in Quito. It was called the toll system, and the trolley system, and this has been quite important. And we have 135 kilometers of dedicated lanes. And in this 3-year period during our administration, we have doubled the amount of passengers that use these main corridor systems. In the past, we moved 400,000 passengers, and now we move 900,000 passengers per day in these main lane systems. And this has been very important from the viewpoint of the transportation conditions for the population. Evidently, because of the way the city is set up and because of the number of passengers we have, well, we have a lot of people, and the trolleybus moves about 200,000 passengers. It goes across the city, and it cannot continue to be the main support system for transportation. So that is why we decided to start building the Quito metro system, the subway system, because we're able to do that. It is not a metro system in the middle of nowhere. No, we have a systemic structure that supports the metro, and this metro system would serve 92% of the population. And 92% of the population of the urban sprawl would have 3 or 4 blocks away from their house a stop for this new metro system. This is the idea that we have, and this is the way the city has been set up. We would have a central corridor, which would be the metro system. The metro system would have a length of 22 kilometers. We would have 6 intermodal stations. We would start operations with 450,000 passengers, and then going east and west, we would have corridor lines that would be parallel lines. And also we would have an east-west feeder system. So we would have a little bit of a grid with 3 corridors that are going to withstand every single modal exchanges in this system. So we are doing a lot of things in our city, and I'm going to end here. I understand that we have to move forward. We need to build institutionality. We're doing that. Second, we need to try to have a unified collection system so that the system can be physically integrated with each of the intermodal stations, from conventional transportation to BRT to metro. And we perhaps need to have a smart card kind of fare card that we can use, and also to integrate the whole city with those elements. And we are making substantial efforts to modernize and to try to generate central points for this system to work via the stations. And these are the things that we are trying to do to integrate our whole system. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Pilar is going to now make her presentation on Metrocali, which is the integrated transportation system for the city of Cali.
Muchas gracias, Adriana. Buenos días a todos. Hoy estoy aquí cumpliendo 2 roles. Por un lado, como vicepresidente de la asociación de SIBRT, les voy a contar un poco sobre la asociación, y también eso me llevará a hablarles sobre Metrocali y el sistema de
into my presentation on Metrocali, which is the integrated transportation system in Cali. It's called MIO. These initial slides are reflecting a story that you all know very well, so I won't be talking about them all that much. But basically, this is the story that we have seen unfold worldwide, where we have the number of trips on public transportation going down, the use of private cars going up, and that leads to congestion, decreased mobility, impact on public health. And basically, this leads us to a conclusion well known to all of us, and something that we have not been able to communicate to the rest of the world, and that is that public transportation requires substantial improvement, and this needs to be done urgently. This conclusion is what led to the creation of our association, the SIBRT. It's a Latin American association of integrated systems of public transport. These are systems that hold high standards They are BRT systems. And one thing that I wanted to make very clear today when I talk about SIBRT is that our main objective is to improve the quality of public transportation in cities where systems are already operating, high-quality systems in Latin America, and other systems that are about to come online. We are clear that if the quality of the service being provided doesn't improve, it will be impossible to turn around the trend that we are witnessing, where there's a decrease in the number of trips on public transportation, non-motorized transportation, and that will stand in the way of our achieving the type of city we want for the future. In Latin America, we have about 64% of the world demand for BRTs and exclusive bus corridors worldwide. So we have a great deal of experience in terms of what we have already done. And we think that we need to continue to work in this direction. And all of our improvements in service quality will also be replicated. We have a lot of corridors already. We continue to build. This is a new corridor in Rio. Transmilenio opened up its third phase on the Dorado Avenue. Metrobus 4 also opened in 2012, so we want to be part of that modernization. SIBRT brings together all of these different public transport entities working in cooperation with other entities like EMBARQ, the BRT Center of Excellence, and universities associated with that center. So we all work together to try to modernize public transportation and improve its quality. For me, this is tremendously important. I already said that our main objective is to improve quality. And another important thing about SIBRT is its association of public transit agencies. Now, here in Washington, D.C., I've heard the question of why aren't we doing what we know we need to do? And for me, the answer is crystal clear, because those of us who know, quote, quote, we know what needs to be done are us, those of us sitting in this room, but we're not the decision making. So I am in a position where I can be making decisions, but most of the people that report to me in my organization that make decisions on a daily basis aren't here. They don't go to TRB. They aren't urban planners. They're not trained in this area. So basically, what we need to do basically is to train these people. And this association, what we're doing is giving us a hand. And this is very important, especially in developing countries. Perhaps in the United States or in Europe, all of the public transportation agencies have many urban planners on staff, many engineers that have studied transportation of all sorts. But in the developing world, that is not the case. So unless we improve the capabilities of these people, it will be impossible for the ideas being discussed here in these wonderful conferences where everyone is in agreement. It will be very hard to get our ideas implemented in the real world. So the SIBRT here plays a key role. And in the year that I have been at the head of Metrocali, this has really helped me a great deal. So we share data, we do benchmarking, we have indicators where we can compare ourselves across other Latin American companies so as to basically come up with case studies so as to continue to improve our practices. We hold conferences, workshops, and we share information even with other associations like Alamis. We also want to create partnerships that go beyond the transportation community. All the stakeholders that are part of our service provision, government and in general, academia, our users, the media, that's very important, banks of all sorts, users, vendors, everything having to do with our providing a service. They all need to help us. Now, in terms of the models that have been implemented in Latin America, we have two major models, two major lines that have been followed. One is something similar to what was done with the Transmilenio, where we built trunk-feeded systems. Then we look at how we can eliminate mass transport, informal transport, try to move them aside. Then we have the Santiago model, the Santiago-Chile model, where the old system is being replaced with a newer low-cost system because it's impossible to build metros or BRTs along all corridors. And then once that's in place, we try to optimize the model with BRT corridors. What we think right now is that we need to do something that's somewhere in the middle. We have to come in. The idea is to shoot for an integrated system where you can not only have metro lines or BRT lines, you have to have different levels of service across the city, but you need to have a single system that's integrated in terms of fares, means of operation, and that's where the Cali transportation system comes in. Our objective is to become that type of system in just a few years. Cali is the third largest city in Colombia. This is the mode distribution in Cali in 2005. Unfortunately, these are the most recent data that we have, and hopefully we'll be able to bring that data up to date. But we see that about 40% of the population uses public transportation, but 35% walk and 11% ride a bike. But just like in most countries, investment in transportation usually was going to the 10%, the 7% that takes taxis, the 10% that are driving their own cars. So basically, most of the budget went to things that favored that small group, whereas public transportation was operated by private operators, and then the transit agencies had poor control capabilities. Now that in terms of public transportation in Cali, and this is what we can see now. So we have advanced in terms of our transportation system, working with BRT and integrated transit system, but basically this was operating in a vacuum. We needed to have a sustainable mobility plan that would talk not only about BRT corridors, but that would also address the need to maintain the mode distribution that we have in public transportation, bikes, walking, and invest in infrastructure for that type of travel to encourage it. And once we have these alternative mobility options, then we could create incentives that would work against using people's cars. So the objective is to replace the old conventional bus system with a new integrated transit system, Metrocali, to grant as a concession the operation of buses and to move towards a card-based system. Now, 3 different levels were created. 3 levels of service, a service along trunk corridors where there is a demand of more than 60,000 passengers. Then pre-trunk corridors where the demand is between 20 and 60,000. And the idea is to have doors on both sides of the bus, some higher than others, and then also have buses, conventional buses, that would work along the corridors with less than 20,000 passengers along the you can see the trunk corridors in green, the pre-trunk corridors in red, and in purple the feeder routes, and then the transfer stations. Right now we have the objective of covering 80% of the demand for public transportation. Right now we're at 53%, 510,000 trips per day, even though the spatial coverage of the city is 90%. This shows the space coverage. Everything in green is covered by us. What is in brown is yet to be covered. And basically those are the hillsides of Cali where we have to go in with other types of vehicles. Right now, we have 858 vehicles in operation. Before we had old buses, 4,931. The operators have bought 3,220 of these buses, so about 1/3 of the old buses are being phased out, taken off of the streets of the city. Now, in terms of infrastructure, we have planned 38 kilometers of trunk corridors. We have built 36. Then terminal stations, 5. We have built 2. We are building an aerial cable line that will be connected to the system, and then bikeways, a whole system for bikes. And we have built 20 kilometers, and we still have to finish implementing that whole system. Here is a map of the city. Let me show you pictures of what you can see in red. These are the trunk corridors, and in the dotted line we have future trunk corridors that we hope to be able to build. This is a picture of the type of structure that we have. This is a trunk corridor in the middle. These are the stations from the inside, and also from the outside there were pictures. Here, this is a transfer station. This is a future station, garages. This is the aerial cable that is already operating in Medellin and that we're building in Cali. This will be integrated to the public transportation system. Here's the green corridor. You can see the rail service in the city. And I have some thoughts here about the challenges that we have run into, the stumbling blocks along the way, and I would like to share this with you. I know that this is what we're going to be discussing, so I'll leave this until later. Thank you very much.
Pues muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Pilar. Thank you, Dr. Barrera, for these excellent presentations of what you're doing in Quito and in Cali. What we're going to do now is open up our session. We're going to ask Antonio, who is the director of EMBARQ Brazil, to begin to talk about something that we're all going to be commenting on. We'll ask Dr. Barrera and Pilar to comment too. But within the development of an integrated transportation system, where are the major challenges? Where are the barriers? Where are the stumbling blocks? What is the hardest thing to deal with? So I would like for us to think about where are the hindrances to the system, not only in your own ambit, but within the whole city, and with these tensions that exist between public and private transportation. Well, thank you very much, and I'm going to try to speak Spanish. It may come out as portuñol. The interpreters may suffer, but that's okay. I think that the major challenge that exists, and Brazil has a great deal of experience not only with BRTs and bus corridors, but also with integration. In Brazil, we have been doing this for a very long time. But unfortunately, we haven't systematized this sufficiently, and I think that that's something that SIBRT needs to address, providing support, because they're very interesting lessons. But I think that in Brazil, there is a situation slightly different from what we saw here. Our motorization level is much higher, so cars are losing out in terms of street space. So there's a great deal of pressure in terms of time and space. So in Brazil, we're trying to do something which is really hard to do, and that is to turn this process around. I think that the major challenge that exists in that connection is to structure corridors right from the start, not having this as a gradual process, but in our case, we would have to rethink how we could do this. And I think that there's a tremendous opportunity for us to have terminals, for example, that wouldn't only be bus terminals. That's the way we usually have approached this, because we see that the generalized cost is very high, because the time it takes to do the integration or to transfer from one mode of transportation to another is long. So you would have to plan a corridor where there is express service, because people need to make up for time lost. There has to be reliability in terms of keeping to a schedule, and there has to be incentives for integration. Now, these corridors are costly. They require space, and there are some spaces in cities that could be used for this purpose, and this opens up a window of opportunity, and that is coming up with urban structures that would bring value added. And then the whole challenge is how can you make certain that these new structures will be sustainable so that they won't wind up just being a hub that would give rise to businesses, etc. But we would need to bring a lot of life into these spaces. So I think that this is the major challenge, and perhaps this isn't all that easy to do. In terms of quality, and I think that many of us have focused a great deal on time, especially as engineers, but we also have to look at occupancy, just to put one more element on the table. So I would call on Jorge Kogan so that we can hear from both ends of the panel. So could you please tell us where you think the challenges lie? Good morning, and I want to thank the organizers for their kind invitation. I think that the whole matter of integration has many dimensions, and you can approach this from different angles. And it's also important to make it clear that you can't generalize all concepts, because if you begin with the institutions, the different jurisdictions of different political agencies, there are tremendous differences between urban areas that have a single authority and cities like we find in most of Latin America, where there are overlapping jurisdictions, and the integration amongst them, if there's no political will, if there's no institutional or political arrangement so as to lead to a convergence and shared ideas, there is no integration of transportation systems. So this institutional issue that was discussed yesterday, in our mind, is a key issue, because most of the cities of Latin America that we work with have this problem. And beyond speech-making, we need to have concrete progress to integrate the authorities working in the same area. And that's something that is very difficult to achieve, although we've been working in that direction. Now, often new projects cause greater convergence. New projects, things that are very visible, sometimes can bring different authorities to the same table. But this isn't necessarily the case, because we think that there is still a great deal that needs to be done so as to integrate transportation in large cities. This can be done with no integration. A lot has to be done in terms of managing transportation. This is not a very attractive area. It doesn't attract much political prestige. A friend of mine, a minister for 10 years in a Latin American country, through the press was able to engender the idea that doing maintenance was just as prestigious as opening up a new project. And in that way, he was able to cut ribbons and inaugurate new phases of maintenance of an old road. And I think that that was a really brilliant idea, and it did help solve a problem that we face across the region. Now, perhaps it's not all that easy to inaugurate a crosswalk or to open up a bikeway, but I think that we have to think of how we can do this, because all of this is essential. If you don't have the political will, if you cannot come to an agreement amongst authorities and get everyone working within the same space based on common ideas, it's hard to move towards integration, at least the type of integration that we think is necessary for the major cities of the region. Thank you, Jorge. Arturo, your views, please. Thank you, Adriana, and I want to thank the organizers. And how nice to see these presentations on Quito and Cali. But I'm very encouraged to see that we're having this meeting, because from the trenches, as a planner of transportation and as a bureaucrat in the World Bank, I see that one of the major barriers is what I call the modal wars. The war between the BRT and the Metro. Peñalosa, the former mayor of Bogota, said that public transportation isn't only transporting passengers, it's transporting customers. And we have to treat them like customers, because public transportation is a service. And it's public transportation. It's not one mode or another, because the competition isn't amongst modes. It's with cars and motorcycles. And that's a competition that in the long run can affect the sustainability not only of the city, but of public transportation as a service. And I know cities where motorbikes have annihilated public transportation. Mayor Bloomberg said that decisions are political, and they have to do with support. If those in favor of public transportation is divided into two, those coalitions that support the use of private vehicles win. Those who are fighting the war between BRT and metros are fighting, then the cars win. We saw another division between light and heavy rail. The competition is with cars and motorbikes. So we have to look not only at the little tree, the trunk, but we have to look at the whole forest, which is an integrated system. The forest is a lot richer than the tree. And that's something that we have to learn as we model public transportation. We have to look at the forest, find the forest, and look at legitimate interests that exist. Someone that has invested into buying a bus or that has invested somehow in the system. We have to look at the forest and not the trees. And Lerner said that not doing anything in our cities is criminal. Thank you. Thank you, Arturo. Jorge, please. I'm sorry, Rafael, please. Your views. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Adriana. I wanted to thank the World Bank for inviting us. Well, I don't have a technical background in transportation. My experience is a bit broader. I've worked with environmental and social issues. And from that standpoint, I think that one of the main issues that sometimes gets forgotten is, who are these customers? They're people. People who often don't have access to the service. And I think that one of the major challenges that we face is that integrated transportation needs to be inclusive. It needs to include the needy who require transportation. In our cities, generally speaking, the poor strata live in the places that are furthest away from the production centers or the centers of economic activity. So they're the ones that need to travel to reach their work. Now, another issue that also has a social context is reconversion of traditional chaotic transportation that we have in most of our cities, and somehow bringing that into an organized system. And that's one of the issues discussed yesterday afternoon. And I think that that is a very important issue. within this whole policy context, I think that there's another very big challenge, and that is continuity of policies and processes. We have countries where mayors serve for 3 or 4 years. Mexico has the fortune of having longer terms so that actions can last longer. And when there are changes of administration, often there's backpedaling. Progress is lost. And in part, this is because civil society needs to play a more active, direct role. And it needs to participate in such a way that it gives rise to policies and they can make their voices heard. And I think that that would be the key to having longer lasting policies. Thank you, Adriana, and I wanted to thank EMBARQ and the World Bank for this invitation. It seems to me that amongst the challenges that we face in this connection, one of the main ones is to better communicate. When we talk of an integrated system, I think that the population in general, if you were to do a survey, I would say that very few people would know what we were talking about. So how do we frame this? How do we communicate this to decision makers? Many of us are fortunate. Here we have a mayor who understands about these issues, but most of the decision makers are not users of public transportation, so they understand very little about these issues. Another important issue is the physical integration beyond the mode, the technological concerns. I think that physical integration is absolutely essential, because what good is it? And we have to think of the weakest link. How can we go from, or take the metro, then have to change to another mode if it takes more than 10 minutes? We are not providing our users with a good service. And this also has to do with the terminals. I think that here there's an area of opportunity. I'm thinking of the terminals where the different modes hook up. They need to be better designed. They not only should be on the outskirts of the city, they should be in more central locations. And all of this would provide the user with a better experience. And I think that that's what we need to target. We need to improve the quality of the service, perhaps transportation with a good level of service is a right, I would say, because it's access. And lastly, I would say that there are two important areas of opportunity for the future. Of course, technologies. We see this in terms of the cell phones. There are different ways of communicating that we have now, but I think in the future we're going to have the possibility of saying, okay, I want to go from A to B, and what are my options? And their integration is absolutely essential. And then another area of opportunity, and this is something that cities are already doing, this is something that we haven't exploited fully, and that is the flexibility that buses provide. The idea of them having doors on both sides of the bus, that we can serve routes that take a trunk route and then get off of that route. So that's something we have to make better use of in the future. Well, thank you very much. And so now we go back to you, Doctor. But I wanted to refer to what the group has been saying. This comes from NGOs and banks, and this is that we need coordination amongst different actors in the metropolis. There needs to be coordination from one administration to the next. And then another important issue when we talk about quality, everyone is thinking of the European systems that are high quality, but then the fare would probably be prohibitive for many users. It's not only not wanting to pay, it's not being able to afford. And then trains versus metros. We would have to look at this in an integrated way, then change of traditional transportation, integration of traffic, maintenance with the idea of re-inaugurating old projects, and then technology. So in your life as mayor, in your day-to-day work, where do you think the major challenges are in terms of making progress? Well, this is like psychoanalysis. Many questions. If you are a mayor, and if you want to take cars off the road to set up a dedicated lane, you would have to organize the users. This isn't what the drivers want. So there you're affecting many, many interests. And a project to modify the structure of a transportation system, that's not something you can do in 1 or 2 years. Probably something like a metro or a corridor, that cannot be consolidated during one term of office of the mayor. So if you're short-term in your outlook, this can be fatal, quote, quote, for a politician, because next time there's an election, you're going to be halfway through consolidating a corridor, or you have opened 1/2 of the land that you need for your project. But that's the day in and day out for mayors. That's what Mayor Bloomberg was saying. Everyone wants great service without having to pay for it. And everyone wants an empty street ahead where they can drive at top speed. That's what everyone wants at 8 o'clock in the morning when they leave their house. And of course, that's impossible. So we, by fortune, don't have an institutional restriction because we are metropolitan. We control the whole area. And I've talked to many colleagues, and I know that for them it's tremendously difficult to consolidate their efforts if their mayor's office controls a small area and they have to coordinate with all of their neighbors, the other mayors in the same area. And that's something that, fortunately, we don't face.
There's an important decision that we need to make, and it has to do with how to organize all the stakeholders. And we are working on a policy that tries to work with conventional buses to train drivers, and this is a coming and going that we're negotiating. And we want public transportation to be a social priority, and we've worked many, many years to do that. And there's an issue of cultural asymmetry here, because sometimes the voice that you hear the most is the voice of the car driver, and the problem is, of course, congestion, and people think, well, build more roads instead of putting in public transport. So I think the common sense is perverse in cities, and this has to be reverted. And I think the public opinion should identify these problems and understand them. And of course, we have financial limitations. We make enormous investments in this, and we have invested on this metro system, and we have 4 multilateral institutions in the world. The European Development Bank and the IDB are also included in this Quito metro construction project, and the World Bank, we hope, will come along shortly. And this is very, very important because this project will transform our city. So we need to have a very clear idea that we need to have a certain number of passengers for this project to be financially viable. It's an enormous investment in construction, but we cannot have an operating cost that is being subsidized. So the fare has to be just, and we have to have a reasonable gap from the viewpoint of finances. So we have to, the investment has to be recovered. We have to think of the metro as a school or as an institution. But those are some of the restrictions that we have, and these some are the challenges that we have. I think political authorities are there to make viable these transformations, because otherwise we would not be able to make these decisions. Every day you are trying to expand the Cali mass transit integrated system. Where is the challenge for you? Well, we have operational challenges daily, the most complex of which is a cultural change. It is very difficult to implement a system like this without a cultural change, not only from the viewpoint of the users, but also from other viewpoints. If we have an organized system, we cannot have a bus stop in every single street in the city, or to have buses that stop at certain bus stops. And sometimes this is culturally difficult to understand. It is easy for us to understand it, but it's difficult for our users to understand. And also to pay with a fare card and to have the trust that the money is going to be kept in that card tomorrow when I'm going to use the bus again. This is really difficult to understand for our users and for our workers as well. So everyone working in the mass conventional system in our city are now offered employment in the new system as well, and this brings about a cultural change, or has to do with a cultural change in our people, and also the financial sustainability of the system. That's another issue or another challenge. We self-imposed this idea where the BRT system has to be self-sustainable, and it depends on the system that you're implementing. If you're implementing a system like Transmilenio, where you have a large number of passengers, or systems such as the city of Guayaquil, that's one thing. And then if you have other systems where you are thinking about a more social aspect of mass transit, where everybody is going to have access to mass transit, because even though they live in rural areas, well, that's going to be very difficult to sustain and to maintain. So the question in Colombia is the following. Well, if we want to have these systems that are going to give access to every single person everywhere, well, those systems cannot be self-sustainable. Those systems are going to have to be subsidized. So from the institutional viewpoint, as I mentioned before, institutional capacity of the human resources are a very important matter, and when you have institutions that are strengthened and they're capable, and you have a civil population that is aware of the situation and that is very involved in decision making in the city, well, things are easier when you have those kinds of people working next to you. Thank you, Pilar. I think we are touching on an issue that has to do with the social aspect of transportation and the difficulties that are brought about by social change, and the difficulty of dealing with the different stakeholders, and also the financial aspects we have also mentioned. We hadn't mentioned this before. I think when it comes to competition with the cars and the issue of quality and cost. For example, in the city of Mexico, Metrobus has increased in demand by 30 or 40%, but people would like to travel more comfortably, because they travel with a lot of people, and the buses are packed. So that's what people are complaining about. And of course, there is a financial issue as well. People can also pay a certain fare. So those things have to be taken into account. Moto Silva from Brazil sent us a question from Google Moderator. It says here, most of governments, when they plan an investment in transportation, they think of large amounts of money. What are cheaper and faster initiatives? Can they exist? Can they be viable? And how can we extend these more sustainable means of transportation? Is money always a limitation? And let's start with Bernardo, and perhaps Bernardo can start. We're starting from the other side now with the answers. Yes, I think we need to look at that issue and look at the fares and the rates. This is a very sensitive issue. One of the good things about integration is that we can provide a better service, and at the same time, the systems can be more profitable. This brings about a series of challenges, and we have examined some of them. I think the political issue, the interinstitutional issue, those are fundamental issues. Our cities are larger and larger, and we have the urban outskirts and the suburbs, and we have to get to work together with the other systems in an integrated manner to provide a good service to the user. Well, we have invested a lot of money on BRTs, and now we're talking about beginning a metro system. If we have 50,000 vehicles coming into the city, and each vehicle is $30,000 per vehicle, and we have millions of dollars spent in vehicles, and the construction of a metro system also costs millions of dollars. So now, that is what happens if you buy 50,000 vehicles in 1 year at $30,000. You can use all that money to build a metro that's going to last 100 years and is going to mobilize or is going to move millions and millions of people. So you have to think about from that viewpoint. So we conducted a feasibility study that takes into account all the externalities, environmental externalities and other externalities. And I agree with Bloomberg. We do a lot in our cities, and the main contaminating factor, the main pollutant, is transportation. In our case, transportation is 85% of the pollution. So when we go from fossil fuels to clean energy, well, that's a big gap. It's a big jump that we have to take, a big leap. And in Quito, we have a rich north and a poor south, and in the city. So when a person has to cross the city in 3 hours, well, that's a long time. But if you use the metro system, that same trip can be made in 35 minutes. So I think the environmental issues are very important, the social issues are very important, and I think all these things have to take into account to make decision-making more viable. The question is very interesting, and I would like to answer the question from the viewpoint of budget restrictions. First, we're talking about this forest and the tree, right? All cities have corridors that can include metro systems or BRT systems, depending on the space we have. Quito is an example. They have 135 kilometers of BRT. Now they're going to have a metro system, and also a myriad of buses. And I would like to also bring in the issue of disabled people. 30% of the population, or a large percentage of the population, is disabled. And if we include disabled people, universal access, we increase the cost 5%. But if think of the Paris Metro. There's not going to be universal access to the Paris Metro because to change the Paris Metro would cost millions and millions of dollars. So the same thing happens to integration. If you put two stations 300 meters apart, well, we increase the cost, and we also discriminate against disabled people in an enormous manner. This issue of integration, well, Integration has to take other things into account apart from motorized means of transportation. We have to think about how people move and how people move in short distances. Sometimes cities don't think about having sidewalks that are pedestrian-enabled. Sometimes they're very narrow, or sometimes they have posts in the middle of the sidewalk, or there are holes on the sidewalk. So it is important for us to improve that to facilitate access to other modes of transportation. It is complicated to change something that was already built. So the problems we see are in the larger cities, but we do have an opportunity to move ahead in the smaller cities. In those cities, for example, we can reduce distances and we can have better urban planning. And this is a very important issue that we have to take into account, because if we plan this accordingly, we facilitate access and we reduce trip times and have better fares as well. Toni, political cycles are very, very short, and that's a big problem. If we only do fast things, we have to make sure that the fast things we do don't compromise structural things that we do, because if not, we only focus on the short term. The mobility law is very important. Other countries can look at it as well. So if the cities don't abide by these plans and by 2015, they're not going to have access to federal funds. So if a political cycle ends, then the plan is already implemented, so the next administration can follow the plan because it's been said before. So we talked about these large corridors that mean that enormous investments have to be made, and that has to be there throughout time. Jorge, very briefly, please. Yes, the question was how can we have quality transportation, high quality transportation, at the lowest cost possible? The answer is the following. This is not a Christmas present. No one's going to bring money to a city just because. So the people who live in the city have to pay for the transportation means. And in our region, the possibility of these people to pay money is very limited. So it is very difficult to have quality transportation for all. And sometimes in some cities we have one line, two lines, one corridor, two corridors, and that's it. That's the commitment that the country or the city can make, regardless of the number of the loans that you take out via multilateral organizations, because we can mortgage the next generation or the next two generations, but public budgets cannot be blocked because of financing a public transportation that is going to tie down funds for decades on end. So the fastest thing is to improve what we have while we conduct structural developments. There are some exceptions. Quito is an exception. Quito is doing everything fast and on time, but we have to think that simple projects that had a 3 or 4 year term took really 10 years in some cities. We have to solve the problems with the things we have. To improve the quality of transit is not to facilitate the use of the car. It means that small buses, informal buses, can move faster and more conveniently so that people don't have to go ahead and buy motorcycles. If people buy motorcycles. Well, motorcycles can zigzag through transit, or they can use sidewalks, or they can use bicycle lanes. So the bad news is that it is cheaper to ride a motorcycle than a bus. It takes 1/3 of the time to get to your destination, and that is why motorcycles are growing 15% per year in Latin America. And that's going to grow. And we have cheaper motorcycles, and national governments are creating loans so that with a very small amount of money, the amount of money that the person would use to pay the public transportation service for a month, well, motorcycles are there. Because I'm sure that you're going to have to finance motorcycle lanes very, very soon, Arturo, in Latin America, because motorcycles are going to take over. If you would like to come up to the mic, and we're going to take 3 questions at a time, and then we're going to answer the questions. If you would like to address the question to a specific panel member, please do so. Identify yourselves, and also tell us who you're directing your question to. Well, what things can be done to improve things at a low cost? Well, things can be done. You can manage transit with the elements you have. And Cali, the city of Cali, is an example of that. We started doing very, very simple things. For example, putting little cones on the road so that certain lanes could be exclusive lanes or dedicated lanes. So these are very simple things. They're not very expensive, and the trips times have improved substantially when it comes to public transportation. 25% it has gone down, transit times, or rather trip times. So, and this was done during the first 6 months of government, of the administration. So it is important to have intelligent people in our institutions making decisions, and also in connection with the Brazilian mobility law. I don't want to be a sourpuss because Toni is very, very happy with the law, but if we don't have institutional capacity, a law such as this is worth nothing. We have laws like that in Colombia, and every city has to have a mobility plan, and it was imposed by law. It is a very long report. It's a 40-page report, and they invited people to 3 meetings, and they say, okay, we have abided by the mobility plan, and that was just done in writing. So if you don't have a population that is quite involved with these plans are worth nothing. And so they're simply things on a piece of paper. So what we need to do is to have trained people doing these things. We have to have consultants in the government, outside of the government, and also we have to have a population that is quite involved in decision-making in the cities. Hi, I'm Hector from MIT. I wanted to ask, what is the financing model after construction when it comes to do with public participation of administration? That is to say, what portion is going to be paid, what portion is going to be paid with public funds. In Barcelona, my city, 60% of the cost is covered with public administration budgets, or regional provinces' budgets. Somebody mentioned the European quality model, and so we wonder how sustainable this model is. And public organizations cannot use 60% of their budget to these things, I don't think. But this is specifically to the Mayor Quito and to Pilar, my question. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentations. My name is Wen Cash from ENDC Chapel Hill. I think that we have 2 realities that we have to look at, and they're conflicting. First, we have to provide a very good service for users that have the option of using private cars. But also we have to provide good public services for those who cannot afford a car. And we have a problem then. And when we look at the average and when we see how efficient we are, we can offer low costs for the majority of people, but we don't have to look at the average. We have to look at the variety of people that are going to be the recipients of this system. So how can we ensure that people that are low-income people and also high-income people can receive the transportation that they need? Thank you.
I have a question regarding the integration of public transport with cycling and walking as feeder transport and egress transport. So I'm interested to know to what extent you try to make the public transport, the trips, more efficient by at the same time also facilitating cycling and walking towards the station in Quito, Cali, but also regarding the banks and to what extent you include it in your loans and in your policies. Thank you.
Mi nombre es Paulo Custodio.
My name is Paulo Custodio. I am a transportation consultant, public transport consultant. I have two very practical questions that I wanted to put forth, and these are for the mayor of Quito. You're saying that the metro is going to transport 450,000 people. That means that 1,000 buses are going to be taken away from the streets. And that is a problem that has impacted many, many cities. And this may make the metro viable or not viable. For example, Line 5 of the Sao Paulo Metro, the Guadalajara Metro, the metro systems in other cities where the buses are still there. And the metro system has a very, very low demand, and these metro systems are not sustainable, and they are like white elephants there. So the second question is, how can we turn around the car trend? We have to start changing this idea of cars versus public transportation. We have to start charging cars for what they do. Why don't we start with you? There are two questions, I think. There's one, a general question that has to do with the capacity of payment. How much comes from the government and from the public budget, and how much comes from the private? What happens in Quito? Well, there is no magical solution. There's no perfect model. We know that this is true every day, and we are not assuming that the integrated system and the construction of the metro is like a magic wand where chaos is going to be turned into this magical land of wonder that only happens in short stories. So there are a lot of things that we need to do in the short term, and politically it is very important to do this because this makes viable the concept that public transportation is important. We have extended our systems. We have established stops at universities. Our system works 24 hours. Before it stopped at 10 p.m. We have express lanes. We have also tried to have specific bus stops for the conventional bus lines. And this is very, very important, and we have to do this. So the integrated system model has to be included in the comprehensive administration of the city or management of the city. There are certain areas of the city that are vacant. 30% of the land is vacant. So it makes no sense for us to extend the city and go to the mountains when we have undeveloped areas. So many of the public investments have to do with these things. For example, the ministries and the courts, the family courts, all of those buildings are going to be integrated with the metro. They're going to be close to metro stops. And this is going to allow us to rebuild a centralized system. These are vital urban interventions. This is allowing us to plan the city. We're comprehensively planning the city. We're not just establishing isolated bus stops. No, we are integrating them into the city. We are recovering public spaces, simple things such as sidewalks. People in Latin America sometimes don't walk 2 blocks because they feel insecure and they take a car. So in many American or European cities, if you make a comparison between trips on foot and trips by car, you're going to see that in the States and in Europe, people walk more. Also, there is not you cannot really have a good transportation system, but we also have to walk. You have to walk to the bus stop. You have to walk to the station. No system can work without people walking as well. And what we've done is incorporated systems with hourly restrictions. We had a system of car exclusions and according to their license plates, and people thought that this was going to be terrible, but no, it wasn't. It actually improved transit, and now you also have to pay to park on the streets there. So we've extended the areas in which you have to pay to park, so people don't bring their cars because they have to pay to park their cars there. So this makes this incentive so that people don't bring their cars into the city. So we're changing the structure. We are trying to incentivize one mode of transportation over another. It is important to make this short-term efforts, and the transportation system is an integrated transportation system. This has to do with a general effort to plan the city. Thank you very much. I think there are 2 other questions. One has to do with the investment in bicycles. How are we thinking about these? This is for Pilar. And also there's another issue that has to do with subsidies. And I think Brazil has a very interesting experience, and I think our colleague from Brazil can comment on that. We have very little time, so I would like an answer to these questions.
Yes, regarding the bicycles in Cali, what we are doing very quickly is in the 3 major terminal stations we have bike racks, parking places where people can bike to these stations. We lower their fare because for us it's much more economical to transport people that get themselves to that station. That way I don't have to use a feeder bus to pick that person up. So that will be a fair incentive, and they will be able to park their bicycle at the station. So that's a first step. And we're working on being able to implement a complete bicycle system of shared bike ownership, and that would be through the public transportation agency that I head. Then there was a question on operational cost. Now, in MIO and in other systems in Colombia, the government subsidy is usually for infrastructure, for building infrastructure with government resources, and operation is 100% covered by the fares charged. The subsidy always has a major risk of having to pay for an inefficiency. So subsidizing service always runs into that problem. In the state of Rio, they had a very interesting experience. They subsidized individuals, paying individuals, and then that was after the individual used the system. So that opens up a window of opportunity so that the individual will choose the service that he or she wants to use. And I think that that's something that will be done elsewhere in Brazil, not to subsidize the system as a whole, but subsidize the individual. In the case of Rio de Janeiro, that subsidy was measured by Getulio Vargas University, and they measured the impact of the subsidy in the labor market, and they found that it was positive, that people who live far away from the central place of work in Rio, thanks to that subsidy, have become eligible for employment. And the same can be said of the handicapped. People that live far away, that are poor, that are handicapped, can be very productive, can work, and subsidizing the users can help them contribute and provide higher value added than subsidizing the system. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up, but since we began a bit behind schedule, I'm going to say a few last things. We're asked for a recommendation, a request to local and national governments so as to be able to scale up the implementation of integrated systems. So what I'm going to do is very quickly move the mic from one end to the other and ask you to only say a couple of words, a couple of sentences, not a whole paragraph, just a request. What would you ask for? Look at the forest and not the trees. Make certain that things go beyond political cycles with social participation. I think that I've said it, to improve the technical capabilities of those who work in these systems day by day. Long-term planning, but doing things with a sense of urgency. Not forget that there's a lot that can be done with what we already have. By improving what's already in operation, we can move ahead in parallel with major projects of the future. Better inform and generate incentives. Make certain that decision makers use bicycles, walk, and use public transportation. Very well. Thank you very much. This has been a very good session. I wanted to thank all of our panelists.